Trudeau didn't like us, I guess, and did everything in his power to have us removed. But still, there was never a judge that deemed it illegal.
I am a husband, a father, a lawyer, a Christian, and a proud Canadian. I started this series because it was clear that our nation needs truth. Not just another biased narrative, but real information of substance. We need access to facts and the freedom to think for ourselves. I'm Leighton Gray, and this is Gray Matter.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Gray Matter. Well, today we have a really incredible guest. I know that everyone who follows this show is going to be very excited to hear from him. Someone who's very, very topical in the news. But before we get to him, I want to talk a little bit about heroes. And for me, if you're like me, you think that this is a term that's thrown about a bit too much. It's thrown at celebrities and sports stars and politicians and people who really, in my view, don't really deserve that moniker. Not that there's anything wrong with having heroes. I mean, when I was a kid, I had heroes, and people like who are comic book heroes like Superman, hockey stars, and of course my parents. And I still have heroes today. But for me, a hero is somebody who is a leader and who's someone who's willing, who has courage, and is willing to stand up for what is true and what is right, even when it is at great personal sacrifice. And the person we have on the show today, in my view, fits all three points in that definition. And his name is Chris Barber. Thanks for being with us today on Gray Matter, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Leighton. It's good to be here.
So we're going to talk about the convoy. We're going to get into it in some detail about how it came about, how it was conceived, and some of sort of the exciting moments that occurred. Before we get into that conversation, though, as we always do, we're going to frame our discussion with a few famous quotations. These are from famous American statesmen, and it's not for any particular reason that they're American, but I think the Americans, we can all agree, have a particularly inspirational concept of freedom. And so firstly, from Thomas Jefferson, who famously wrote, "I prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery." That certainly applies to our guest today. Next, from Abraham Lincoln, another famous U.S. president, who wrote, "To sin by silence when they should protest makes cowards of men." And finally, from the late John F. Kennedy, who wrote, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." Along with Pat King and Tamara Lich, Chris was one of the three main organizers of the Canadian Convoy protest. And in January 2022, he spoke of his ambition to persuade politicians to end vaccine mandates. And February 2nd, in the context of noise complaints from Ottawa residents, he released the written statement, "Our message to the citizens of Ottawa is one of empathy." So I want to go back to, let's say, to the end of 2021, let's say around Christmas time or thereabouts. And I'm interested to know, and I haven't really heard it said, although I just recently read Tamara's book, which is going to be on our reading list, folks, in case you're wondering. When was the idea for the convoy first conceived? How did the idea of the convoy, the concept of it, first come about?
Well, the idea of the convoy first came from another social media and truck driver named Bridget Belton from Ontario. So Bridget is an owner-operator, cross-border transport, who was going to lose her livelihood and didn't want to get vaccinated. Myself, on the other hand, I'd already taken the pressure from the government and decided to get vaccinated. I commonly tell people I've been in this industry for 30 years, and I've been fighting really hard to keep the big carriers away from my customer base. So you fight with them as competition, you do good work, you quality work, you stay ahead of them like that. And then the government comes in and slaps this mandated cross-border travel on us as truckers. And I had to weigh the pros and cons, and I fell for the mandates. I became vaccinated. Bridget Belton, on the other hand, and a lot of the people that I work with in this industry decided they weren't going to do that. And something had to be done. We had to stop this, or at least try and stand up to it at one point. So Bridget was the one with the original idea. She reached out to me. We both did social media posts. Mine went a little more viral, I guess. And then being from the West, we had the longest drive across the country to get to Ottawa. So that's how I kind of rose to fame there. Tamara Leach reached out to me about a week and a half later, and gave me her information. Told me she was really good at logistics, and we needed a little bit of help. And so right away, then she started the social media accounts and the GoFundMe, and it just blew up from there. Just completely grassroots, unbelievable.
Well, so I want to talk about this a little bit, so people get a sense of this, about how crippling this whole restriction on cross-border travel was for truckers. I don't think most people don't realize, I know I didn't until the pandemic came about, how the extent to which goods are being moved on the roads by truckers, like more than by anyone else. Everything that comes off a train, everything that comes off a ship goes on a train and ends up on a truck in Canada. And of course, the United States is our largest trading partner.
It
So
is.
all of this mandate, this requirement of truckers that they be vaccinated was hugely crippling to tens of thousands of truck drivers, wasn't it?
Well, and the Trudeau government likes to say that 10% of Canadian truck drivers are not vaccinated. I think that's a fallacy. I believe it's closer to 30 to 35%. I know of a real big number of truckers that decided to go against the vaccines. And it just seemed like at what stage was next? We were, when the pandemic started, I remember not being able to have access to bathrooms, to restaurants. I had to put a coffee maker in my truck so I could get a coffee. You think of the trouble that we had as over the road long haul truck drivers using the bathrooms in parking lots, and it happened. A lot of us, we had nothing. I remember coming home after a couple of weeks, first into the pandemic, and telling my wife, I can't do this anymore. I'm not eating out of my truck like I'm doing. I can't use the bathroom outside like a wilderness animal. And I lasted about a week and a half at home before I thought, yeah, I have to go back to work. So then I continued on, but it was a pain, and I don't think a lot of people know. For the ones at home that were in hunker and shelter in place, we were out there right from the start. So we were literally the heroes at the beginning of the pandemic, as well as the nurses and the doctors and the police and all that. And Trudeau made us zeros
Yeah.
eventually. That was the wrong thing to do.
Yeah. You were publicly applauded in the
Yes.
early part, and rightfully so. But we've never really recovered from the disruption of our trucking lines, have we? The disruption in the economy in terms of people call it supply chain, which is really a euphemism, but really that disruption in the supply chain was really the interference of governments with trucking, isn't it?
It ran really well.
Yeah.
It ran really well until government decided to keep pushing buttons and buttons, and they continue to do that in different aspects right now. Whether it be your carbon pricing, it's taking a huge hit. I know. I just electronic logbooks and mandates that are constantly coming into the industry. They're crippling us harder and harder every day. I'm watching more people. I'm a 30-year veteran of this industry, and I commonly think to myself, why do I keep doing this? This is one of the highest regulated industries in Canada, alongside air traffic. We're constantly under scrutiny, officers pulling us over and going through our equipment left, right. It's for safety. I understand that, but I run a tight ship, and I make sure my stuff is up to date, and yet I'm still getting tired of this.
It seems somehow incongruous. On one sense, it doesn't make sense. If I envision someone like you driving a big rig, you're all alone in your truck for hours and hours, days, or even longer. Why do you need to be vaccinated? You're not having, direct contact with hardly anyone. So why do you think that the vaccine requirement was focused upon truckers?
That is the question that the government still won't answer. And I can tell you from experience, up until January 15th of 2022, when we were crossing the border, I would cross into North Dakota, South Dakota. There was no requirement for COVID vaccine passports. It was business as usual. Restaurants were full. Walmart was full. Small businesses were booming. And you cross that border into Canada, and it was day and night, Leighton. It was, and that's what I couldn't get through my head is, why do we need these band-aids in place when things are operating quite well on the south side of the border, but they're not in Canada?
Right.
So I've said it from day one. I've said it now. Make it make sense, and they still continue not to make sense in their requirements.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, for those of us, I would say, um, and this isn't a nice term to ascribe to myself, in the laptop class, we had it pretty good, in terms of not being required to be vaccinated for work. But you coming back to you, vaccine mandates focused on truckers. You had the choice of not getting vaccinated. Of course, you're the head of your company. You chose to get vaccinated. Have you ever regretted that decision?
Well, of course, I regret falling for the narrative that they think the government wanted to. One of the biggest deciding factors behind why this movement started and why I did this personally was I have a 20-year-old son now. He was 17 at the time, and he refused. He said, "Dad, my immune system," or he was 18 at the time. He refused to get vaccinated. He said, "My immune system is strong, and I don't feel that I need to get it." And to this day, I've had COVID multiple times. I've survived. My son Jonathan was in the truck with me or right with me when I had COVID, and he still yet to catch a sniffle.
Not fair, eh? But
No, not for.
it says a great deal about you, though, that even though you were vaccinated, that you got involved and organized and really spearheaded this convoy that was on behalf of people who, of the 7 million Canadians, not just the truckers, but the 7 million, at least 7 million Canadians who didn't take the vaccination. Why did you do that? What inspired you to get involved with the trucker convoy at such a high and a deep level?
It did pertain to me in a lot of respects. Like a lot of the guys that I work with in this industry, we lost a lot of drivers throughout this mandate. And when Trudeau introduced that January 15th mandate for cross-border travel, a lot of those guys that I've trucked with for many, many years decided to find an alternative route. They went Canadian only, they retired, they sold their equipment, they shut their businesses down. And that affects my bottom dollar. Now I have a harder time finding employees that are willing to cross that border. And we've struggled with that. Cross-border drivers, we there's still quite a few guys out there do that, but the quality in our drivers nowadays is significantly less than it once was. A lot of the guys have literally walked away from it. And so it's those guys. It's the Tamara Leaches in her industry. It's the Bridget Beltons. Even look at Danny Bulford. It's Canadians in general that don't feel that we should be mandated by our government. When does it stop? And then
Yeah.
I remember Marco Mangicino was talking about interprovincial check stops that were going to be going up for COVID. Do you remember that? And
Yes.
when
Totally
those
unconstitutional, by the way.
yeah, trucks started rolling, and that conversation kind of ceased. But if could you imagine what would happen today if somebody wouldn't have stood up?
Well, it is easy to imagine because we lived through it, and the truth is, for those who don't know, if it hadn't been for these truckers, we would still be locked down, all of us. So what was that process like of trying to meet with political decision makers, and were you disappointed by the reaction that you received?
Very, yeah. It wasn't long into our drive when we started hearing remarks from the Prime Minister of Canada calling us, misogynist and racist, white supremacists, and which was kind of really hard to take considering there was so many different cultures
He's
and
calling parents
backgrounds.
that now, Chris.
He is
Yeah.
so. And the one thing that I guess makes me most angry about this prime minister is he's so divisive and divisive and hateful and hurtful that how could somebody with this kind of an attitude run a country like this and divide a country like this? It drives me nuts to see the stuff that he's getting away with on a regular basis. And when are people going to wake up to this? We heard so many of those bad stories, and all we wanted, I guess, the main thing we heard from Canadians as we traveled across this country was, "Don't leave. And you've given us hope, and we would like you to stay until you resolve something." And so, with us that on our shoulders heading out there, why wouldn't you open a dialogue with your Canadian people when there's hundreds of thousands of people standing in front of Parliament Hill? Is that enough to get the Prime Minister's attention to at least want to have a conversation? If we made the effort to come all the way to you, could you not have a conversation? But we learned through the POEC in Ottawa in November that their plan was to attack us that way through the media and by calling us names the entire way. So there's been a lot of stuff that's come to light, and Rodney Palmer, he's a veteran CBC journalist,
Yeah.
amazing guy. And
Yeah.
when he walked the streets in Ottawa and interviewed, like who's the white supremacist on the street, and the Jamaican man says, "Well, it's not me."
That's for sure. Well, yeah, and speaking off the top, I was talking about heroes. Mr. Trudeau would not fit my description, at least.
No.
But at some point, this became a kind of a crucible, like a vice situation where you're getting pressure to stay, pressure to leave. And this became a difficult situation. And I know in researching, you talked about this during your testimony at the National Citizens Inquiry, that there was something of an internal power struggle started to take place within the management committee of the Freedom Convoy. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think anytime you throw a group of opinionated people together, you've got your, like there's a few people within the core group that we don't associate with much anymore. Egos or the drive for money or fame or whatever it may be always seems to take effect, and true colors seem to rise to the top, and that's definitely happened. I hate to say that, but the two people that went out to Ottawa together in the cab of that red truck was Tamara Litch and myself, and those we still stay unified as today. Although we can't speak without lawyers present. We have to have conversations through Eva Chippy.
Lawyers are sometimes useful, Chris.
Yes, they are. I've dealt with so many lawyers in the last 17 months. I never would have imagined.
Well, hopefully that experience has not totally ruined you. You seem to be well and whole at this point. But eventually, obviously, what happened was awful. It was a national and international travesty what occurred, the way that the convoy broke up. And this became, I remember seeing some of the Facebook posts where the committee members and you and some other people were in a room, and you were saying, this could be really bad. They could be coming for us today. That must have been really terrifying.
Well, it was. Like I said before, I've spent 47 years of my life and never in handcuffs, never with a threat of arrest, never entered a jail cell or been charged or anything like that. So to be arrested, to be handcuffed, to be placed in the back of a car and hauled away to a jail cell my time in jail in Ottawa City Jail was pretty minuscule compared to Tamara or Pat or George. My 26 hours in a little 5x8 cell was
long enough to know you don't like it much.
Yeah, uncomfortable as can be, and I missed a lot of the police crackdowns. Of course, I was arrested on the 17th. The order to start arresting protesters was given on the 18th, and I was released on I drove home on the 19th. I was ordered to leave the city of Ottawa within 24 hours, the province of Ontario within 72 hours. I basically went from the police station back to the hotel, into a waiting car the next morning, out to the outskirts of Ottawa where my truck had been parked since like February 7th, I believe. My truck was taken out of downtown with we'd heard some stories where there was going to be some violence and some action taken towards it because it was the truck that led the convoy. So we decided to get it out where it was safe. Fired it up and headed home. So unfortunately.
Yeah, I read one news report that said after you're released from bail, you were ready to go home. You said your organizing days are over. That was in February of 2022. So this must have taken a lot out of you, and not only emotionally and psychologically, even physically. Being away from your family and all of the creature comforts and your routine. That how long did it take you to sort of recover from that experience?
I remember, I don't remember exactly what day we reached the city of Swift Current, but we came home to a homecoming. There was a lot of people there. There were standing, and a lot of hugs, and a lot of tears. I went back to the farm. I was lucky enough that my wife was with me in Ottawa for roughly two to 3 weeks of the time. So I had her with me. I had my son with me. We traveled home together. I remember the next morning of being home. I was watching TV in the living room, drinking a coffee and staring at a TV that wasn't even turned on at 4:30 in the morning. I didn't know what to do. I think I came home and crashed. It was 3 weeks of the long days and cold temperatures, and then to be arrested at the end, and then come home facing charges too, and the uncertainty of where we're going to be sitting, after trial. And that's a lot. I guess it's a lot to play on a guy, a lot more than I thought. So I don't know if I quite really crashed yet. It's been busy ever since, whether it's be work or whether you're going to functions or trying to keep awareness going and make sure people know the truth of what actually did happen in Ottawa.
Notwithstanding the fact that you've been charged, you're facing a series of of charges. People should know that you're going on trial in September. But that has not stopped you from speaking out. You were active. You spoke at the National Citizens Inquiry, and you also testified at the what was a bit of a sham, in my opinion, the Emergencies Act hearing that occurred in Ottawa last year. What was that like? What was your take on that experience, the testifying in the Emergencies Act hearing?
Well, we went out to Ottawa. I was subpoenaed to go back to Ottawa for the National Inquiry, or for the POEC, and I thought maybe I would be able to sit in the audience for a little while and watch some other members like Bridget Belton or Tom Marazzo or Danny Bulford go first. And then last minute, it was the trucker side of the people were to hit the stage on the Tuesday morning, and lo and behold, it was Chris Barber was the first witness. So I got a couple days of listening to Peter Slowly, ex-police chief, and then it was right with me on the stage. So I got it. I didn't sleep a wink the night before, of course, and that's intimidating. You're on the world stage. It's new to you. I've never had to testify. I've never been in a courtroom before, to be honest with you. And then all of a sudden, you're on the world stage, and they're throwing questions at you, and all I can say is I answer them. I walk into the courthouse in the morning. Keith Wilson says to me, he said, "Did you sleep last night, Chris?" I said, "No, not a wink." And he said, "Good. That's better for testimony," he said, and he smiled, and we walked into the POEC.
That's our good friend Keith Wilson, Alberta lawyer, a classmate of mine from the University of Alberta Law School.
Okay.
You said the world was watching us, and we had the legal right to a peaceful protest. And you still feel that way, don't you?
Yeah, I believe there's never been a judge that's deemed the Ottawa protest illegal.
Right.
There's never been a judge, and even though Trudeau didn't like us, I guess, and did everything in his power to have us removed, that still there was never a judge that deemed it illegal.
Mm-hmm. So the prosecution that's upcoming, at one point, your lawyers filed a motion for a stay of proceedings, right? That happened, I believe, in February of this year. Yes. And but that was unsuccessful. Were you told why?
It wasn't unsuccessful. What happened was when I was arrested, they confiscated my cell phone.
Okay.
And they then got a warrant to search the cell phone. And through Tamara Litch's bail process, they somehow released all 4,200 pages of my cell phone evidence into the court. And miraculously, CTV News just obtained them instantly. It was amazing how Glenn McGregor, who is, by the way, not with CTV anymore, he was just actually let go the other day. That's so sad. So we launched a charter application for a breach of privacy, and in the proceedings of that, the ramifications of that, or dealing with that at this time right now, was just a little bit too much. We have a really good judge that we've drawn. And a lot of things would have changed if I would have proceeded with that charter application. So we pulled it back for now. We've always got the right to refile it after trial. We'll see how things go. There's a very good case there. There's a lot of private conversations with my daughter and my wife, my ex-wife, my family, my business customers, that was released to the public, not to the public, but to the media, I guess. So there should be some accountability held there, and there will be someday.
And their explanation is this is just a whoops, right?
Yeah, sorry. It was released on a Thursday afternoon before a Friday long weekend, and it wasn't, we couldn't do anything till the Monday morning. So, that's what we expect from our government, isn't it?
Yeah, it does sort of show, or it does demonstrate the truth of what we learned, as far back as Edward Snowden, that really we are living in an era where we don't have any private communications anymore. Almost any conversation, anything we do, if we're using any type of digital device, we can be tracked and recorded, and these things can be produced and used against us. And so, I mean, for that reason alone, your case and the one involving Tamara is really, really important. I want to get to our reading list. We close off our show with the reading list, and my choice of books today are probably not going to surprise anyone. The first one is, of course, Tamara Leach's book called Hold the Line, and there's a lot of Chris Barber in that book. The second book is a book from a man who's actually been on the show before. He's a podcaster and journalist named Andrew Leighton. You might have had the chance to speak with him, Chris. If you haven't been on a show, you probably will be at some point.
Yep.
And he's written a book called The Freedom Convoy, an inside story of 3 weeks that shook the world. This was released about a year ago. And there's one more, actually, I want to mention. This is a book which I found very interesting. It was released about a year ago from Tom Guigan and Rick Gill. It's called Eyewitness to Deceit. And this Prime Minister Trudeau's info war on the Freedom Convoy. This is a book that's taken from a different perspective. So those are my 3 books. Chris, are there any sources that you would recommend for our viewers, our audience?
The one that I'll throw you off, it's not a book, it's a documentary. It's called Unacceptable. Eagle Vision Video Productions.
You know where people can find that though, Chris?
If you Google Unacceptable or Eagle Vision Video Productions, you will find it fairly quickly. I think that movie touched on every range of emotions I have. I was happy, I was sad, I was angry. And then just, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. I've watched it 12 times now, Leighton, and I still to this day get emotional when I watch it.
Well, sadly, this COVID story, the story of the pandemic was just the beginning. We're starting to see the fuller story unfold, but that only makes what you and the other people who are involved, every person, not just the high-level organizers like yourself, every person who was involved in the convoy, everyone who experienced it, it only makes what they did so much more relevant and important and historical, really. And so I have to say to you, Chris, you really are a hero to me and many Canadians. I know that makes you a little bit shy and embarrassed, but you fit my definition of a hero any day of the week. I'm so grateful for your sacrifice and your courage and your vision and to do this for all of Canadians. I know that it was done at great risk. Maybe you didn't think you were risking as much as you were at the time, but you certainly knew that there was a great sacrifice to be made, and you made it, and you helped many, many people, and you inspired many people. So thank you so much for all that you have done. And thank you so much for being our special guest here on Grey Matters. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today.
I couldn't be happier being on here, Leighton. It was awesome having you.